So the past 3 videos have been stages of me building my 32 Ford, and of course now that it's built, or with any other build, you're gonna have a little bit of growing pains. So it's time to start fixing some things, and the first thing I'm going to start with is an oil leak, because this just started, but as much as I know that it's probably coming from the rear main seal, and that's a really bad word for a lot of people, the solution I believe is going to be much simpler. Let me show you what I mean. Since you have so much oil here, and if you have an abundant amount of engine crankcase pressure, the first place you're going to get blow by or leakage from is from that seal. Doesn't mean the seal is bad, and that's what I hope is my issue. Let me explain what gives me that kind of hunch. So when I first got the car going, this was my PCV line, right? And what's actually ended up happening is after this hose got heat saturated a few times, it actually started kind of kinking and kind of creating a humming noise. In order to stop that, I just said, oh, no big problem, right? So long as I unblock it, it'll still breathe. And I use one of these on the carburetor. So here's what I learned. The actual pressure that the motor's producing is not enough to actually push open that PCV valve and let the air out. You also need to connect it to the carburetor in order to complete the circuit. The motor's pushing, the carburetor's sucking, and you're actually completing the cycle. Now, another thing I learned, proper emissions hose is much thicker. Not to mention, this already has a built-in 90, so it's going to go straight from the carburetor to my breather without any future potentials of it kinking. If you guys need a link to this, I'll put it in the description. It should be a quick fix, but one thing that drives me crazy is that my steering wheel is not centered. I always intended for this to be an X so I can see my tachometer at all times when driving straight. I'm about 10 degrees off. That's an easy fix, but I do want to mention one thing. If you know the spline of your output shaft, in my case 36, 360 degrees, divide that by 36, that's 10 degrees per tooth. Since I'm only 10 degrees off of my steering wheel, if I shift that over one tooth, I should have my problem fixed. The other thing I want to mention is that a lot of people, before they put in these set screws, they'll actually go into this shaft and kind of countersink it a little bit to give this something to actually kind of grab onto, if you will. I personally don't like to do that. In my half-educated engineering background, typically, if you actually focus the same amount of pressure on one single point, the finer the point, the better job it's going to do at grabbing. Any machinist or anybody will tell you the same exact thing when it comes to grabbing a tool or some kind of part. Before you actually start machining it, you actually want the minimal amount of contact with the same amount of pressure for the best possible scenario. So you can do with that information as you will. I'm just giving you a different perspective to what most people do, and you can make your own informed decisions after that. The next thing I'm doing is actually going to have to inspect my starter. Why? A little bit of a long story, but let me tell you. So on its first drive on my way to work, as I was getting really close to work, what ended up happening is, even though the air cleaner was really tight, it actually started rotating itself. And as it rotated, eventually it came into contact with the positive terminal of my alternator. And as you see, my air cleaner is not too happy about it. I ended up replacing my alternator on, really quickly on the road, but it completely fried. The terminal itself was completely loose. It melted this entire wire, and it took some of the loom with it, as you can see. So I patched it up just to get me back on the road, but it also melted the terminal on the starter. It's actually quite loose. I noticed that as I replaced that power wire to get me back on the road. So I actually have another starter already, so just to prevent me any issues in the future with heat or anything, I'm just going to go ahead and replace it now. Once the issue happened, I realized that the cleaner was actually moving with the base itself. So what I ended up doing to hopefully prevent the issue in the future is I actually just drilled a hole in the side, installed the screw with the nut on the end, and now as you can see, as it rotates, it actually hits the other side on the outside and prevents any more rotation. So once this is on, the air cleaner is on and squeezed on, everything should stay in place. I've tested it, so far it seems to work, so fingers crossed. So I'm just going to reinstall this air cleaner real quick, and once I do this, I'm going to start taking off the engine harness and get that ready for relooming. I should get the loom tomorrow from Summit. Plus, there's not a whole lot of knowledge, at least for me to share in that whole process, so I'll spare you guys the long time lapse of me just doing that. For now, I hope you guys learned something and enjoyed this kind of first part of this kind of vlog that I'm doing with my 32 Ford Roadster, of not just the growing pains, but also hopefully a lot of the fun that I intend on having with this car. And hopefully we can laugh and learn along the way. Thanks so much, guys. See you in the next one.